Hey everyone, we're officially live.
Hi.
Oh, already have so many friends here too. Hey folks. Yeah, I liked that this was scheduled towards the end of this time, this first couple weeks where most people have been doing social distancing because I feel like okay, we need like a second round of book recommendations now, right? We need like not the first ones. So I'm super excited to have two great friends of the Harry Potter Alliance here. If this is your first Small Things Con event, welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name's Janae. I work for the Harry Potter Alliance. Small Things Con is something we've been putting on half because, we wanted to give folks things to do, ways to connect, half honestly because we just wanted to hang out with our community. So we're like, let's just put some things together. So thank you all so much for hanging out with us. It's been great. Grace and Kazia, you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, I'm Grace. I am an actress and activist, and I run a podcast called The Art Life with another friend of the HP Alliance called named Zandra Robinson Burns. And yeah, I guess I'm here because I used to run a book podcast. I grew up working in bookshops, and although most of my creative work is now focused on other aspects of media and art, like book reading and talking about books, continues to be the through line of like what brings me joy in my life. So even though I don't know, I've kind of moved away from it as like a professional thing, it's like it makes me love doing stuff like this even more because I'm like, oh yay, yeah. I can talk about books.
I can talk about books for a while.
Oh my gosh, I miss this.
That is very relatable, but I'm sort of the flip. My name's Kazia. I am a children's librarian at a public library outside of Boston. I am not there right now. Luckily, I'm very lucky, but it makes me desperately miss doing reader's advisory. So I am super happy to be here. I have a master's degree in children's literature and library science. I review for Kirkus magazine. I also have been on some award committees. I've been on an award committee for informational literature for children. And this year I'm on the Stonewall, which is for LGBTQ rep for children's and teen books. And I'm also part of the Reading While White blog team. So I'm really interested in the ways that many different identities and intersections of identities are represented in particularly children's and teen literature, but everything.
That's a blog?
Yeah, Reading While White.
Amazing. You'll have to send that to me.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. They are so great. I only joined this past year, but they've been doing awesome work. So it's all white librarians who are really trying to critically examine both our reading practices as individual white people and sort of the whiteness of the children's lit community.
Super cool.
Awesome. Yeah.
Cool. And someone is reminding us in chat to just share our pronouns real quick. Mine are she, her.
Mine is also she, her.
Mine's also, I'm also comfortable with they, them, but like we're figuring that out.
Walk for the ride.
Well, thank you both so much for being here. We could not have put this whole event together without all of our awesome friends and partners and members of our community. Begonia saying that this low-key feels like online GLA, for sure, definitely does in every way. Cool. And if you all have not seen yet, obviously this entire thing is free, but like all organizations working in fandom space and nonprofit space and lots of different spaces, the HPA has also been impacted by this pandemic. Unfortunately, we've lost, all the conventions we were going to go to, a lot of our kind of more travel-based programs. So we do have a fundraiser right now. It is bit.ly/support Granger 2020. If you're able to donate anything, we super appreciate that and helping us be able to continue to do more digital organizing like this for as long as is needed. Cool. So I would love to kind of get into some book recs. For those watching, if you have specific like book recommendation requests, please put those in the chat. We'll definitely look at those as well. But I wanted to kind of open just asking you to, like, are there specific books that you have felt really resonant for you right now, or things that are very like, this is my comfort read that I'm thinking about, and see kind of, we can start there.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about how, like, what comfort reads means to each of us too, because I think there's like a really interesting thing where some of us maybe sometimes we need to return to like children's like fiction, like we need to reread something that was really meaningful to us as a kid. And then there's also this circumstance through the ups and downs of my life and the lives of some of my friends where, you know, we're comforted by reading things that are resonant to the dark stuff. Like I have been rereading Station 11, which is an amazing book. Yeah. About a flu, like a flu pandemic that wipes out a bunch of people. But I highly recommend this book if you can handle like reading that right now, because it's all about making life meaningful even through the dark stuff. It's all a book about resiliency and the importance of the arts. Like it tracks basically a Shakespeare theater troupe, post-apocalyptic Shakespeare theater troupe that goes from like little village to little village just to bring joy and entertainment. And like now more than ever, that book is so meaningful to me because as an artist living through this crisis, like it's such an important reminder that there's still stuff we can do for each other, and there's still joy and connection and art we can make to make survival worth it, to make it meaningful. But I was curious with you guys, like, what does comfort reads even mean to you? Because I think that it can mean such different things to different people.
Yeah, for me, a lot of my comfort reads are stuff that I've read over and over and over again, that I've loved. Maybe not since I was a kid or a teen, although some of them, yes, but certainly ones that have just really like made an emotional impact for me. And I sort of was thinking about this ahead of time and trying to figure out, like, I feel like a lot of my comfort books are sort of very similar to each other. And then I either have like my category of sort of like very fluffy, everything's okay comfort reads, or my like young women going through dark times, coming out on the other side comfort reads. And both of those are really helpful, just to sort of depending on where I'm at. And like right now, I think for me, it's been really important to acknowledge too, like I've been having a really hard time actually reading recently.
Yeah.
I feel so lucky. I am not working right now. I'm at home. I'm safe. Like I should be able to just like get through my TBR and really make good progress. Or that's how I feel anyway. And
thank you for saying that, by the way. Thank you for just admitting, like, whoa, thank you.
Like, I love reading. I am a reader. I read probably like, since I mostly read children's YA and like graphic novels, probably like a book or two a week, realistically. And I read one novel over like 2.5 weeks so far. And it wasn't long and it wasn't difficult. So, yeah, I feel like that's something important too. Like if your comfort reads aren't working right now, that's a real thing too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like when I'm even just in regular life, when I'm in like a reading slump or having trouble focusing, like that's a really good time to go back to graphic novels. Because they're they can, your brain doesn't need to focus in as much if you're having anxiety or having a hard time focusing on like dense text. Like now's a good time to maybe even try out graphic novels if you haven't done that before. I don't know if you have recommendations you can give in that arena. It sounds like a yes. I think that's a yes.
I was born for this. you know, obviously depends on what your taste is and what you like, and if you're interested in trying comic books versus graphic novels, and sometimes that's purely like a formatting difference. Like a lot of, as you guys probably know, like a lot of comics have really small font, and that can be hard for some people, either like literally physically processing, or just it doesn't feel as satisfying as reading sort of a bigger font, thicker graphic novel. But the first comic book series that I read, the first thing that got me into a comic shop was Lumberjanes.
Yes.
I feel like Lumberjanes is perfect for right now because it's all about community. It's all about things that feel other, actually not being as monstrous as you necessarily think. It's got really great diverse representation of gender and sexuality. It's really fun. If you have access to Hoopla through your local library, I know a lot, if not all, of Lumberjanes is on there, so you can just read it for free. That's my go-to. But there's so many.
I see a lot of people talking about fantasy in the comments also, and like if you want to jump into a great fantasy graphic novel series, Saga is so good, and it's all about like again like about like resiliency through hard times. So it's about like a family, you know, a couple from warring races that gets together and has a child, which is like a huge scandal. So it's like sci-fi and fantasy at the same time, which is like my really specific favorite genre, is like actually sci-fi and fantasy at the same time. It's the art is beautiful. Yeah, I don't know why. That's the sweet spot. Yes, you do love Saga. Just reading the comments. But like, yeah, I'm feeling like, you know, now's a good time to like jump into something like that, where if you have the time, you can read like a whole graphic novel series or a whole comic series. But not like I gotta admit, like I'm trying to read the Lord of the Rings for the first time right now. And I love The Hobbit, and I grew up obsessed with the movies, but I've never actually read Lord of the Rings, and I feel like, oh, I'm gonna get my geek card taken away. So, you know, like I have to do it. It's on my list for this year as I'm doing it. But it is dense, like it's dense and it's fantastic. But I too am struggling with this like focus thing right now. Because there's obviously so much going on in the world that's taking my mind elsewhere. So this is definitely even inspiring me to like just give myself a break and like read some comics.
Treat yourself. Like there's no, I know I set a lot of arbitrary reading goals for myself, but it's really important to remember that they are arbitrary and they can help and they can make you feel really accomplished, but also sometimes they can be too much. I also saw that I think Serena suggested Princess Ever After, and I would totally second that. Anything by Katie O'Neill is like the sweetest, cutest, prettiest art you've ever seen. So dear. And they're such fast reads. They're beautiful, beautiful, like middle grade graphic novels. And they're fantasy. They're about community. They're super diverse. Tea Dragon Society is about these like little oh my god, it's so cute. These like little dragons. They don't even look like fierce dragons. They look sort of like Neopets dragons. And they don't shoot leaves out of their heads and their horns, and it's so cute. So if you want something that is both like maximum gentle and would be a really quick read for anybody, I definitely second that recommendation too.
Yeah, there's a few good. I'm just kind of scrolling back through things folks have been talking about. Red, White, and Royal Blue, I know, is one for me right now. It's a new one, but quickly well-beloved one. Also the What If Disney Princess books, which I have read. Part of one of those, I think, if it's what I'm thinking of. Tell us what your favorite one of those is, Serena. Lots of fantasy books, lots of Harry Potter, Narnia, some Lord of the Rings. So yeah, feels like things that feel either very soft or very familiar to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if folks were, I really like this acknowledgement of it's also very hard to read right now. I'm definitely feeling that too. I have an entire shelf of to be read books that are just staring at me like
My stack is
now's the moment. Yeah. It's not good. So I definitely feel that, but if there was something you were going to recommend to people in this moment beyond the ones you've already listed, is there anything that stands out to you? And Grace had a good idea when we were talking about this beforehand of maybe talking about, what's a more like nonfiction information type book versus, your category for fiction or a fantasy book, or just thinking about like what are some of your favorites right now that you would recommend to folks?
I definitely lean towards like nonfiction and self-development at this point in my life. That's a lot of my even reading for pleasure. So the first thing I thought of when I saw that we were doing this was there's two books by this British author, Tom Hodgkinson, who is like he's very political, he's like an anarchist, and I found I found one of his books in like an anarchist bookshop, but it's this book called How to Be Idle, and he has another book called The Freedom Manifesto, although I think the British title is How to Be Free. And they're really interesting like books, also like collection. It's his writing and essays, but also collections of other people's writing about slowing down and about having more like agency over your own life and being less controlled by capitalism. So those are books that really influenced me growing up because I just like randomly discovered one, and I love his writing. And he ran like a magazine called The Idler, and it's just like they're certainly informative and at different times dense and like have like history in them that's really valuable to learn, but they're also really soft. And they all, they're also like, there's a lot of writing about crafting and craftsmanship and, how to make bread. Like I think one of them has just like a random recipe for bread and about gardening. So they're like really relevant right now too. They're really about living on more of a budget too. They're about needing less and being less attached to I don't know, to consumerism. And I think all of those things are really relevant right now. I love those books, How to Be Idle and The Freedom Manifesto. And I've been
repeating them because that was my next question.
Yeah. Tom Hodgkinson is the writer, and I think he runs a bunch of like classes online as well too. He through the Idler Academy. But I'm like, oh, this is so relevant now.
It reminds me a lot of How to Do Nothing.
Which is another one I thought we should mention.
Yeah, I read that recently, and that's very like the title makes it sound like it's going to be a very like here's 10 steps for how to be bored.
It's so dense. That book is
not
so dense.
not like that at all.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, which I'm normally not a super dense reader. Like I also have never read Lord of the Rings, despite the fact that my introduction to the internet was a Lord of the Rings roleplay. I've never actually read the books because they're so dense. I'm not like the high fantasy thing doesn't do it for me. But this book was so, and I think it is really good for now because it is kind of like meditative. Just the way that she writes, and she'll talk about sitting in a rose garden and listening to birds and all of these things. And I think if you're able to check out an ebook of that or whatnot right now, which I was really glad that Kazia was going to be on for this. So we have a resident librarian to be like, here's where you go. For
anybody watching, or you guys, like anybody, just find me on some social media if you need help accessing your public library's resources, because most of them have really good digital resources. Let me know. This is my mission.
Another thing I wanted to say for people who want it, because how to do nothing, and the other things I mentioned are like sort of lifestyle books. If you want to, now is an amazing time to be internal and work on your stuff. So I know I'll openly say, like, I'm reading a book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, which is all about meditation, and it's more of a spiritual book and a book about, like, mental health and trauma. And I'm like, now's the time, right? Like, if that's something you're drawn to, if you've been wanting to read more books like that, it's a really good time to start like a meditation practice, or start, doing those sort of like internal work that maybe you've been avoiding.
Yeah.
One that I've been sort of like slowly reading over the past couple of months is Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. It is so good. I'm not someone who typically actually reads a lot of self-help, self-improvement books. I'm interested in theory and then sort of never sit down, but I have found this book so useful. Even just the first section is all about sort of literally like the science behind the stress response cycle and sort of how to disrupt that. And you kind of can't just do it by thinking your way out of a stressful situation. There's a lot of, psychological, but also physiological stuff that's happening when you're stressed or anxious. And as somebody who has a lot of anxiety, I have found it super useful. Also, I want to put a plug in. If anybody, I know everybody's a little bit anxious right now, but if anybody's having a seriously hard time with anxiety, the Anxiety and Phobia workbook is amazing. It's a hefty tome. It's a thick one. You don't need to read it all the way through, but they have really helpful coping mechanisms. So if you can't afford therapy or can't get to therapy, if you are just feeling super overwhelmed in this moment, like, that might be a really practical one to check out.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're talking about this stuff, because I think that there's some great reading in that realm, whether it's stress management or anxiety management. Like, allow yourself to do that right now if that's what you need. There are amazing resources that aren't like expensive therapy, that are just books that you can get.
Yeah, and so in another endorsement for Burnout, like, I loved that book because it is one of maybe the only kind of writing on that subject that I've seen so far that gave specific things to do besides, take 2 months off your job, which was very useful to me. Like, it is, it's nice to read other people's experiences on that front, but it was the first one that was literally like, here's how you schedule your calendar. Here's how you do this. And like, those things have actually helped. So yeah, definitely recommend that one.
And not only that, but as someone who has not gotten on the exercise train, even though I've been told a million times that it would be incredibly helpful for my mental health, that hasn't happened yet. And one thing that I really appreciate about this book is it doesn't just tell you to exercise. It says, like, exercising has all of these huge benefits. But also, we know that not everyone is going to work out every day, or maybe you'll build up to it. And, like, you can lie in bed and tense and release your muscles, and that may not be as good as going for a run, but maybe that's what you can do because of the way your body works, or maybe that's what you can do because that's where your brain's at. So I just really appreciate too that it's not only is it not like take 2 months off of your job, but also it's not like work out 2 hours every day until you die.
Yeah, I've been like partly avoiding social media because I keep getting tagged in all of those workout challenges. Like, I don't know if you guys are seeing like, 10 push-ups or whatever, like, and I don't want to do it right now. I don't. And I want to focus my energy elsewhere. And I see a lot of people, it's like, it's if you have mental health stuff, or like, you know, you don't like, this is such a hard time for like body image and like all of these things that are coming up for people when you're stuck in the house. And I'm like, I am staying away from these freaking like fitness influencers right now because it's not helping. It's not helping. But I will say I do love ear reading, which is what I call audiobook listening. So I've certainly been ear reading some things and like just walking around the block. And I'm like, that's enough, you know, that's enough. It's nice to go get some sunshine or walk around with my roommate at a safe 6 foot distance from all other people. And just listening to something like a comfort read or, you know, a new audiobook that you haven't listened to before. My favorite. My favorite. No, go. Of course, my favorite audiobook that I return to a lot because the narrator's performance is amazing is the Silver Linings Playbook. It's pretty different than the movie. The plot is pretty different. So even if you've seen the movie, it's like a totally new discovery. And the guy who reads the audiobook just like does such an amazing performance. And it's actually it's another one that's like kind of a good time for right now because like the main characters are sort of in this weird they're in a sort of I don't know what to call it, like a middle place in their lives where they're both like getting a lot of treatment and they're not at jobs and they're not they're just working on themselves. And like, you know, that might be a good thing to read right now because it's a lot about like people doing a lot of personal development work through a transitory time in their lives. But I love that audiobook because I just the person who reads it does an amazing performance. And it's a good one.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, and so if you have any other nonfic recs, definitely share those. But kind of on the flip side, has anything been striking your fancy recently in the fiction realm? I will use this stream to my own advantage and pose my biggest question of the last year plus, which is I have hit this, and I know Kazia and I have talked about this a little bit, but I have hit this very strange time where I am old enough now that I often don't necessarily want to be in a teenage protagonist's head, but also am extremely bored by most adult fiction. So like I've been really into like Darker Shade of Magic, like new adult type things, and I would love any recommendations of other things that are kind of in that realm, because I've been very sad about the lack of options lately.
Well, I love the Throne of Glass series, which is definitely YA. But the author actually just came out with a new adult series with a female protagonist. So that is called Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood. As I'm looking at it, it's over there. But it is fantasy, but she writes in a way that's very compelling and it's not super dense and it's very character driven. So, and it is that like young adult genre as in like mid-20s, and so it's no longer young adult. She's on that shift right now in her own career, which is cool. Do you want to take over?
I don't need to take over, but I would definitely say Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I haven't read Spinning Silver yet, but I'm also assuming Spinning Silver.
I like Spinning Silver better.
I've heard that.
That is my perhaps controversial opinion, but I liked it better. They're both good.
Yeah, I think that those really fit into that sweet spot as well. I also I'm looking over there to remember what it's actually called, but I just started reading Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon Maguire, which I've heard about her books for a very long time, but hadn't actually picked up. And this series, I think it's called the Wayward Children series. Someone can confirm. It's quite thin, like each book is quite thin. So that's really nice in this moment, for me at least, to feel a little less overwhelmed.
Yeah, I say that to people all the time. I'm like, just start with short books.
Mhm.
Like if you're in a slump or like, I'm like, read
Yes.
graphic novels, read some short books, give yourself some
Mhm.
momentum so that you feel
Yeah.
like I am like a, I get satisfaction from completion, from a sense of completion. So like, if you want that, that's okay. You can want to like check some stuff off and like have it. Like, I love reading poetry. I read a ton of poetry, and
Yeah.
I'm I am fully present for it and enjoying every second, but it is also nice to like check that off. Like, okay, I read a bunch of poetry.
Yes.
Yeah. And now I don't know if you guys read poetry at all, or if you have any interest, but now is a really good time for that, because I'm like, anything that will open my heart and connect me to like the core and the good in humanity is like necessary right now.
Yeah.
Poetry is like a coping skill for me, like reading a lot of it.
Do you have some favorite poets or poetry anthologies?
Sure, absolutely. One of my favorite poets is Buddy Wakefield, who's like big on the slam poetry scene.
Yeah.
His collection Stunt Water is absolutely gorgeous. Has some of my favorite poems out there, and he writes a lot about different like kind of underrepresented parts of the US, even like he like I have an interest in a lot of writing from like the deep South and like communities that like aren't really represented in at least like Hollywood media. I'm interested in seeing like stories from like misfits in the Bible Belt, and he writes like a lot about growing up gay and poor in like the deep South, and his poetry is just like stunning. His writing is stunning, and he's also big into meditation now, so I like connect to them. So beautiful and heartfelt. So that's Stunt Water by Buddy Wakefield, and he has a new book as well called A Choir of Honest Killers, which has some amazing poetry about like some things that are going on right now in the US that might be beneficial. And then one of my favorites that I return to a lot, which I think some people on here may have read already, is A Dream of a Common Language by Adrienne Rich, which is very short, very impactful, gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And what else? I mean, there's so much. Andre Gibson, they write like anything Andrew Gibson writes is perfect, and that's all I'll say. So just like any Andrew Gibson book is amazing, whether they're writing about gender or relationships or like they're writing life. It's just absolutely beautiful. And I tend to lean more towards like the slam poet genre, like writing style, because it's just so impactful and pretentiousness usually.
Nice. Jinx. So if other folks have specific problems like I do for reading, make sure you drop those in the chat as well. But yeah, so I think I'm curious, like, what are the books that either currently as a librarian or from your past life as a bookseller, Grace, that you always try to give people, no matter who it is and what they have actually asked for? I have not been a librarian.
I had a fight about this.
Did you?
With a guy that I'm dating, because I gave him a book about toxic masculinity, and he was like, "I'm the last person who needs this," and I was like, "I give this to everyone."
Yeah, I have not been in any role where this is appropriate, but I definitely have books that I am constantly trying to give people. Mine is the Young Wizard series by Diane Duane. It's tragically underappreciated.
You and Emma.
My friend Emma are both obsessed. It's been around since the 80s. It's a beautiful, beautiful book that is like kid and adult and alien wizards that's like based in science, and they're working to protect the world from entropy, but also kind of like learning to be friends with entropy. It's just a beautiful series, and I adore it, and everybody should read it. So I'm wondering if you two have books like that, that you try to give people all the time.
I definitely do. I will mention this one I just joked about, because I just read this book called For the Love of Men, which is about like redefining masculinity, by Liz Planck, and it's so beautiful. It's so important. It's also very diverse. Like the people who are interviewed for it are like, there's lots of trans men and men of color. It's not just like, oh, we need to redefine masculinity just for cis white guys. It's not that at all. It's an amazing book. I have 7 brothers, so I read it and I was like, order 7 for everyone. And then another one I wanted to mention, what my favorite book of all time is this book called The Serpent King, which is what I was getting at earlier, which is like a book about, it's a young adult book by this author Jeff Centner about a group of misfit kids growing up in the Bible Belt. The writing is absolutely beautiful. If you need to cry right now, like, this is a very cathartic book. You will cry. I mean, that's like a warning also. There's parts of the book that are very sad, but like sometimes I need that art to like get me to access those feelings. And if that's something you want right now, it's an incredibly heartfelt book that made me a better person. The Serpent King by Jeff Centner. And another cool thing is he is actually, so the book came out maybe 5 years ago, and he has been on Instagram Live reading a chapter up from it, and then like doing like annotated an annotated reading live. He's doing another one tonight, and so he's sort of like reading little sections of the book and telling stories about why he put little details in it, why he made certain name choices. And I love that, like, how YA authors in particular have been sort of stepping up in this time and connecting to their readership and doing like Q&As or reading for their books or starting little online book clubs. Jeff also just did like a live stream book club once a week with some other, and I just think it's so great. Like, people are, like authors are stepping up to get people engaged, not just to sell their own books, but because they know that people are sitting around and need connection.
Yeah. What's yours, Kazia?
I have a couple. I try not to do this in my professional life because that means I'm bad at my job. If I'm trying to make kids read whatever I want them to read instead of what they want to read. But I do this all the time in my personal life. So there's a handful. One that I'm obsessed with right now. Oh, here it is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. It got a Stonewall Honor last year, like this past award season. It's a slim one, which is really nice. There is some trauma in here, so people should, be forewarned. But it's set in this city called Lucille, where angels have eliminated all of the monsters of society, and the monsters of society are, defined as people who are violent, who are racist, who are misogynistic, et cetera, et cetera. And they, the main character and most of the people believe that the monsters have been eliminated from society, but you start to realize that is maybe a little bit more complicated than it initially seems. The characters are pretty much all Black as far as I remember. There are characters with disabilities. The main character, Jam, is Black and a trans girl and selectively mute, and she signs sometimes. Like, there's just some really underrepresented identities in this book, but also it's set in this sort of potential utopia, and so none of these things are a problem in the eyes of the society that they're existing in. And I read the first like page and I just like sighed because it just felt so beautiful and comforting to like see this place where it's just okay to be who you are, and where people are really fighting for justice in a way that I envision fighting for justice. So this is one that I am obsessed with right now, and I'm like, I don't care. It's also speculative. I'm like, I don't care if you don't like speculative fiction. I don't care if you don't like YA. You're reading it anyway.
Yes. Yes.
It's the best.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's not, I did say that there was trauma in it, and there is, but it's not, most of the stuff in the book is not gratuitously graphic, and most of the book is also sort of the main character trying to figure out, like, she's sensing that something is wrong and she's trying to figure out what is going wrong. So it's not just, you know, like gratuitous trauma left and right.
Yeah.
You know.
Awesome. I'm also looking at the chat at what other things people are saying. Begonia's saying Girls of Paper and Fire.
Oh.
I have not read, or I don't think I've heard of that one before, but you're making me want to look at it. Abby's saying Life After Life.
Oh, is that the Kate Atkinson book? I'm guessing it's like I think it's a mystery. I've heard really good things about that one. I have not read that one though.
Well, I love that our chat also is like everyone being like, oh, here's what I'm reading. Here's my favorite things. Serena's asking a clarifying question. Does PET take place during the traumatic event? Or is there like processing of what's happening? Or both?
That's a great question. So basically, like, I want to tell you guys enough that you know if you're comfortable reading it or not, and also not spoil it for people who care about that. So there's sort of two traumas. There is the trauma that the parental generation experienced trying to oust the monsters from power, and that is in the past. That is sort of lightly referenced, but it's very hazy as to sort of the details of what that experience was like for them. So that's sort of like the background setting that doesn't go into much detail. Then we also know, so basically there's like this, her mother's an artist. I feel like I'm telling you too much detail, but I promise. Her mother's an artist. Her mother paints this picture with this sort of seemingly monstrous creature in it. Jam calls the monster, who's not actually a monster, out of the painting, and that creature, whose name is Pet, says, like, there is still a monster left in Lucille, which means there's also something bad happening here. Right. And the course of the book is trying to figure out what that is and where that's taking place. And you know, by the end, you know sort of what has happened, and you know like who had this experience. So it is technically, this trauma is technically occurring over the arc of the book, but you are not witnessing it firsthand. It's happening to somebody who's more removed. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Hopefully that helps. Yeah.
That was good. That was a good overview without so in our last kind of wrap up minutes here, I wanted to give both of you the opportunity for And you can do this in the chat too, if like you use this as your moment. But if there's anything that you're like, man, why haven't I said this book yet? Now's your time to just kind of like dump anything else that you're like, everyone should read this. So any final recommendations from both of you? And in chat, feel free to fill up the comments with just anything on your mind for book recs.
The first book that I read this year, which was like, it was just through like a personal recommendation, was The End of Eternity by Isaac Asimov. And like, I haven't read a bunch of like classic science fiction. That's like one of my things for this year. Is I actually do want to kind of brush up on history. But The End of Eternity by Isaac Asimov it's absolutely amazing. And I think that a lot of like kind of hard science fiction, classic SF writers like wrote a lot about situations that are unfolding right now. In the 50s, they wrote about things that we're seeing happening in the past like decade. And End of Eternity it's a book about time travel, and it's a book about someone whose job it is basically to enter different periods of time and make small adjustments to change the fate of human history, to try to control every little detail for the greater good, essentially. And it's about this technician who's starts to grapple with the consequences of controlling other people, and without their knowledge. And the book is challenging at times, and is absolutely hopeful and optimistic and just beautiful by the end of it. And I read it on a whim because of a personal recommendation, and I was angry at different parts of the book, and I was like, and they just, without giving any details, it wraps up in a way that is so freaking beautiful and so heartening, and so much about like the necessity of struggle and the necessity of of surrender to like the ups and downs of life, and that we can't control everything, and that's that's okay. That's one that I really recommend reading right now. That's not about a plague, but is it might tap into something about like the value of these times that we're going through right now.
Yeah,
it's The End of Eternity. Yes,
nice.
I just saw that Abby said we should all be reading or rereading The Two Princesses of Bamar, and that is so true. It is very timely with a sort of plague, fever, flu situation, but also it's like a beautiful middle grade fantasy. It's about sisters. It's about anxiety and being brave when you don't think you're the brave one, and it's really, really lovely. So I definitely second that recommendation. And I also saw someone recommended Super Late Bloomer, which is a really lovely comic as well. But my recommendation it's so hard to choose, but but one that I keep thinking I've been wanting to mention is The Soul of an Octopus by Skye Montgomery. It is so lovely. It is nonfiction. It's sort of part memoir, part like straight up science nonfiction about octopuses. She went to the New England Aquarium in Boston and got to know like several generations of octopuses. And her narration for the audiobook I find incredibly soothing. And if you just want something that's like slow and gentle but thoughtful, and you will learn new things, but there's not sort of any high stakes, I think that's a really great one. One thing I will say is she doesn't really explore the ethics of animal captivity at all, one way or another. And that's the only like small thing that I was like, but I wish we would talk about this. But otherwise, it is like such a comfort for me.
Awesome. Yay. Well, thank you all again both so much for coming on. I found it very soothing to just listen to you two talk about books that I like, so I really enjoyed this. And thanks to everyone in the chat for your awesome recommendations as well. If other things strike anybody, I feel like you can tweet them, #SmallThingsCon. People can check out the tag. Or if you're in the HPA Discord, definitely drop it in there. Yeah, and this, this is something that we've really enjoyed putting together for everyone, and really enjoy just like being able to hang out with people, break up our work life a little bit. But if you're able to make a donation, that again is bit.ly/supportgranger2020. But it is wonderful simply to have all of you here and be together in the ways that we can during this time. So major thanks to Grace and Kazia again. Hopefully we get to chat more soon. But yeah, thank you all. Have a good rest of your Friday.
Thank you so much. It was amazing. Thank you everyone who commented. Also, I like wrote down a bunch of like things on my phone, like subtly, because there's so many good things being mentioned. I was like, what? That sounds amazing. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.